This idea of a universe that was created from nothing or from a point or from a primeval atom was enormously attractive in some ways. It resonated with a kind of creation understanding, a moment in which all things began, but it also infuriated certain people as being somehow incompatible with the uniformity and scientificity of the world. What I'd like to do now is to look at a huge controversy that took place between two alternative accounts. One, this idea that the universe came from a point-like singularity and expanded out, and the other was exactly the opposite, that somehow the universe had always been doing what it was doing. Yes, it was expanding, but it was expanding because new matter was constantly being generated. This came to be known as the steady state account of the origin of the world. The three people who joined together to push this view, and with whom the theory was identified, were first Hermann Bondi, who fled anti-Semitism in Vienna in 1937. He was interned as an enemy foreigner for a period of time and then released, worked on radar. He was a humanist, ardently against the idea that religion should stand at the center of all things. There was Thomas Gold, also fleeing Nazism from Germany, also interned, also released, also worked on radar. And then there was Fred Hoyle, a rising star in astrophysics at Cambridge, who in fact named the Big Bang, which he detested, in 1949. The three knew each other from the war work on radar, trying to declutter the radar from reflections off of things on the ground, and all accepted the expansion of the universe, but all refused that the explanation of this was a single propulsive event at the beginning of all things. One evening, shortly after the war, it was 1946, the three of them went to the movies to see a new film that had just come out in 1945 called Dead of Night, with Mervyn Johns and Michael Redgrave. Johns played an architect who was coming out to renovate an old house. And as he comes into the house, he sees a scene that somehow seems extremely familiar to him. And as it turns out, what transpires takes place over and over again in a nightmarish repetition. On leaving the film, as they were heading back towards Bondi's rooms in Trinity, Gold turned to his two friends and said, "You know, that film could have started anywhere. It is completely circular. They should play the film as a loop in cinemas so you could come in at any time." And as he said that, it gave him the idea of a universe that kept playing the same creation story, not one creation story, but the same creation story looped. Bits of matter coming into existence, the universe expanding, but this was a process without end and without beginning. Let's take a look at a scene from that film.
Darling, whatever's the matter?
Another nightmare.
You poor sweet. Hello? Oh, just a minute. Darling.
Walter Craig speaking. Darling, you're on my feet. Oh. Bill put you on to me. That's fine. What name is it?
Elliot Foley. F-O-L-E-Y. Yes, and the place is Pilgrim's Farm.
Right.
Who was it?
Friend of Bill's wants me to go down for the weekend. A reconstruction job. An old farmhouse in Kent. Elliot Foley. Pilgrim's Farm. I wonder why that sounds so familiar.
A weekend in the country. I should go.
I'll toss for it. Heads I go, tails I don't.
Heads.
I go.
That's just what you need, darling. It'll help you get rid of those horrible nightmares.
So Gold and Bondi were for this idea of continuous creation, as was Hoyle. And Hoyle put it this way: for it is against the spirit of scientific inquiry to regard observable effects as arising from causes unknown to science. And this is, in principle, what creation in the past implies. For these three astrophysicists, the idea that there was a special moment picked out in all the world seemed to go against everything that science stood for. On the other hand, the idea of the Big Bang received a very welcome reception among people who saw it resonate with the religious account of the beginning of the universe. Pope Pius XII was fascinated by this idea of the universe expanding out from a single point, and he read with great interest the work of James Jeans, of Milne, of Whittaker, all of whom were arguing for the Big Bang theory as completely in accord with their Christian beliefs. This was actually a long-standing way of thinking about religion and science that had saturated thought at Cambridge in England for over a century. It was something that you could see in the period of Darwin and biology and physics, people like James Clerk Maxwell, this idea of a kind of natural religion, a religion where the work of the Creator was manifest in the details of the physics. James Jeans was at Cambridge. He was a very important scientist who contributed to quantum mechanics, to stellar structure, and he was an idealist. He believed that ideas came first. Consciousness preceded any material reality. And he became a real advocate of the steady-state universe. Edward Arthur Milne also was a worker in stellar structure, also at Cambridge, and wrote things like Modern Cosmology and the Christian Idea of God. He also saw this cosmological science and Christian belief to be fundamentally in harmony. And Whittaker, who wrote a history of the ether, by the way, completely sideswiping Einstein. He attributed relativity to Poincaré and Lorentz. But he had converted to Catholicism and became a member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. He argued that science cannot be independent of religion. Pope Pius saw in these new developments, the development of the Big Bang theory, its interpretation as being fundamentally in accord and supportive of a Christian point of view, and as he spoke to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, he put it this way: it would seem that present-day science has succeeded in bearing witness to the august instant of the primordial fiat lux, when, along with matter, there burst forth from nothing a sea of light and radiation. What, then, is the importance of modern science in the argument for the existence of God based on change in the universe? With exact and detailed research into the large-scale and small-scale worlds, it has considerably broadened and deepened the empirical foundation on which the argument rests. Thus, with that concreteness which is characteristic of physical proofs, it has confirmed the contingency of the universe and also the well-founded deduction as to the epoch when the world came forth from the hands of the Creator. Hence, creation took place. We say, therefore, there is a Creator. Therefore, God exists. One student of Lemaitre, the philosopher and historian of science Ernest McMullen, recalled the day when Lemaitre stormed into the class on his return from an academy meeting in Rome, just that time when the Pope had delivered his address. And as McMullen recalled, Lemaitre's usual jocularity was entirely missing. He was emphatic in his insistence that the Big Bang model was still very tentative, and further, that one could not exclude the possibility of a previous cosmic stage of contraction. Well, Lemaitre seemed to be saying, if the universe had expanded and contracted previously to the beginning of our current Big Bang, well, that would mean that this wasn't the creation of all things. It was just a point in the longer history of the universe, and we just didn't know. Lemaitre, together with Daniel O'Connell, the director of the Vatican Observatory, apparently intervened and eventually persuaded the Pope that it wasn't a help either to science or to theology to try to make the two fit together like hand in glove. And after that, the Pope never returned to try to invoke scientific cosmology as a support for Christian account of the creation. Even decades later, in 1988, Pope John Paul II cautioned against, as he put it, making uncritical and over-hasty use for apologetic purposes such recent theories as that of the Big Bang in cosmology.